Thank you for joining us. My name is Yomika Bennett. I'm the Executive Director of the New York Charter School Association. With me today is Marcos Crespo, former Assembly member for the 85th Assembly District in the Bronx. Hey. He stepped away from elected office this year to join the private sector. I'm thrilled to have a chance to catch up with him today and discuss education and his thoughts on what the future holds. Marcos, welcome. It's good to see you virtually.
It's great to see you, Yamika, and I appreciate being here and joining everyone at this conference, and hope to share some insightful words with everyone that's here today.
All right, looking forward to it. So you and I, we've known each other for years, going back to our days in the Assembly. I was a staffer when you were elected to office, but we met even before that. I consider you a friend, and I'm glad you're able to take the time today to talk. So first, I want to say, how are you, and how is life after elected office?
Life is good. It's a transition. It's an adjustment. I didn't realize it was going to be harder, more from a mental perspective. I have to sort of change the lens with which I see things. And sort of the box we're in when you're in elected office, the things you have to be careful about, and sort of switching gears on that has been challenging. And then also enjoying my free time. I didn't know what having weekends was like. And it's like I still stare at my phone thinking that it's going to blow up with responsibilities, and it's a little bit different now. So, but that's partly why I needed to make a transition, spend more time with my kids.
Very good, very good. And I'll come back to that because I want to ask about virtual learning. So since you mentioned, so you were voted into office at a young age. How old were you when you were elected?
20.
Can you talk a little bit about what that was like, and how important do you think it was for young people to be in civic life and elected office? 28 is a young age, so I don't know if I would have had the wherewithal to do that at that age.
I'll be honest with you. So it's interesting the way you phrase the question. Yes, it was challenging for me. And again, kind of like with the transition I mentioned a minute ago, it was mostly myself. But what helped me sort of make that adjustment a little more I guess easier was the fact that I interned for someone, and I replaced someone, the guy I interned for, Ruben Diaz Jr., who started when he was 22 and who was kind of frowned upon early on in his career until people realized how substantive he was, how hardworking he was, and his energy and his ability to sort of build a real strong network and socialize. And he opened doors in a way and forced others to kind of change their mindset on how they saw young men of color, in particular people of color, in the legislature. And so by the time I got elected, I benefited from that tremendously because a lot of the relationships he built, I carried forward. The fact that I had interned and worked as a staff member, it created some familiarity with some of my colleagues. And so I think my colleagues treated me very well from the beginning. I was the one constantly doubting myself and questioning myself as to whether I belonged in the room, whether I was smart enough to be in the room. That process took me a little bit of time to find my comfort zone. But yeah, it was an interesting process that was made a lot easier because of my predecessor.
So you were also a young leader in the Bronx. So you weren't just a young elected official. You were a leader. What was that like? So I hear that you're saying like, well, that right now everybody we understand the concept of imposter syndrome, where you don't feel like you belong, like as you were saying, that are you smart enough, are you seasoned enough? How is that like in leadership role, even above, and sort of beyond the elected office role?
Well, two things that are very interesting. Right now in this broader conversation around racial justice, social justice, equity, I have come to understand, particularly now more than ever, I kind of look back and understand it better. The fact that many of us from the neighborhoods we're in, with the challenges we've had to overcome, with the poverty we've had to rise out of, you carry a sort of a level of self-doubt, a level of trauma that impacts you. You never feel you're good enough. And many of us kind of have to overcome that. And that's step one. Then you have to overcome some of the outside challenges and the way people kind of treat you, and whether you can break some of that down and move past it. I've come to understand that at every step of my career, I have been my own worst enemy. I have been the one that's doubted myself, that's challenged myself, that doesn't think that I'm doing well enough. And it can be a motivating factor, but it could also sort of hinder a sense of accomplishment. That's one part of the, sort of explanation. But the other thing is this, I came into politics at a time of great transition. There were a lot of changes. A new governor came in. A lot of members with seniority were leaving the assembly, retiring. Some got into trouble. Others went to work for the administration. So there was a big turnover of leadership, and that accelerated my opportunity for growth. One of the things I often talk about is that people who step forward to put themselves in front of an issue, whether you're an elected official, an advocacy leader, whatever it is, you cannot be afraid of the responsibility. You cannot want that. You can't want to be the spokesperson. You can't want to be the leader, but then be afraid of the challenge of actually having some semblance of whether it's power or influence, as people refer to. So when young enough, I was asked, would I take over the Puerto Rican Hispanic Task Force and lead the Latino delegation? I was one of the youngest member, if not the youngest member at the time. But I took on the challenge. When I was asked to take on the Bronx Democratic Party and lead the party, I wasn't the most well-known elected official in the Bronx, but I knew that I can bring people together, bring a fresh perspective, and carry on the responsibility. And you don't often get that platform. And so you can't be afraid of that challenge. I think, it's a mistake a lot of people make, that they want to lead, but then when they get that responsibility and that platform, they shy away from it, or they find excuses not to move forward. And you got to just kind of run with it and give it your best and speak from the heart. And I think things work out. And they did for me. I'm grateful for the opportunities I had to sort of lead the Democratic Party, work on issues in the Latino community. It allowed me to be a part of the response to Hurricane Maria, where mommy lives, my family lives. That's an experience I'll never forget. And there's so many of those experiences that public office afforded me, and some of the roles that I had afforded me.
Can you say a little bit more about that, sort of the connection between, right, so elected office, public officials, right, you have a large public role. You took on more, and you mentioned that now, so I'm assuming that that's something that's important to you, that's impactful for you. Why? What's the significance?
Because that's what it has to be about. I've always, in our community, we've always used these sort of expressions like, oh, the people in power don't care about us. The people in power use that power to take care of their own. They don't care about any. Well, you know what? If I was lucky enough to have an opportunity to be in the halls of power, as the expression goes, and mingle in some of those circles or serve in some leadership roles, then I'm going to take it. And I'm going to use that same influence, that same network, to respond to the things that matter to me. So I would like to believe that because I accepted that challenge and was serving at the right time when the right issue came up, and these things always happen in people's lives, that I was able to shape the way in which some of these issues took place. When Hurricane Maria happened, the governor came forward. He said, look, I want to help Puerto Rico. How do I do it? I had the opportunity to help shape that approach, and it worked in so many ways. And there are a lot of little things like that I was able to do in my career. But I think it's important that we understand that we can't shy away from having that influence. If you have the opportunity, not everybody does, and some of the most deserving people don't get that platform. But if you have that platform, use it. If you have a voice for something, use it. If you have a moment in time to talk to the right person about the right issue, do not let it go. You don't get those options, those opportunities every day. If you are a parent who happens to be in front of your state senator or your assembly member, don't trivialize that moment. And instead of just asking for a photo, say, or ask for the photo, while you're taking the photo, say to them, how are you fighting for my kids? How do you feel about this issue that I'm concerned about as a parent, my kids' education? And it could be something as simple as that can have a tremendous impact on how decisions are made.
Thank you. So you pivoted to education. So let's, which is sort of the reason for our conversation today at its core. So let's move deeper into education. And you and I have spoken a lot about education in the past, and certainly the collective power as well as the needs of the Black and brown communities. You're from the Bronx, but born in Puerto Rico. Stop me if I'm getting this wrong. Spent some time growing up in Peru, right? We talked about your elected official at a young age. So I'm going to say this plainly. You're a Latino man from the Bronx. How'd you get here? What do
So I had
as you talked about your internship with Ruben Diaz Jr., but talk about I'm going to say it this way, right? We talk about, and I'll say we writ large, we, the media, the communities, all kinds of folk from in a way to uplift as well as a way to oppress, talk about the experience of the Latino, particularly male, right? Latino from areas like the Bronx, the impoverished areas. How do you get out? How do you that kind of thing? I want to say to you that this is something different, and that you're here. So how are you here? And tell the naysayers what it is.
Yeah, look, the journey is an interesting one. I'll try to give you the really condensed version, so for sake of time. But I was born in Puerto Rico. My mom is from Puerto Rico. She had my brothers and I, my sister, at a fairly young age, and so she interrupted her goals of becoming an attorney to take care of family. My father grew out of extreme poverty in Peru, the oldest of 12. Came to this country as an undocumented immigrant to try to, help his family, help his brothers, his siblings, and they met here in the city. We family had a tumultuous history, to put it lightly. We moved around quite a bit, not often because by choice. It was necessity and circumstances. So I was in 4 high schools, 3 junior high schools, and 3 elementary schools. I was never put. And then you add to that the cultural identity issues that myself and so many Latinos in particular go through. People of color in general, but I think Latinos have a really interesting mix. So when I was in Puerto Rico, I was the Peruvian kid. When I was in Peru, I was a Puerto Rican kid. When I was here, everybody thought I was Mexican. It was amazing how no matter where I went, I was never fully accepted by any side of my culture. It was always as if I was somewhat in it, but not quite. And that affected me in so many ways because I wasn't sure. And because of all that change and constant move, I had to adapt to different environments, to different points of view, and you sort of kind of get used to it after a while in a very weird way. But it's a challenge. It was an ongoing process that I was always sort of, I not reinventing myself, but just finding ways to fit in and feel comfortable. And that's something I still kind of deal with. My stepmother was Colombian. My wife is Dominican. I have so many different little influences, and we all have our idiosyncrasies that you have to adapt to, and traditions, and even some of the words you use in one culture you can't use in the other. So all of this was constantly evolving in me. And the reason I highlight that is that when it came down to me thinking about what I would do career wise, it was a challenge to kind of focus and to understand where would I then fit in. I'm still not sure who I am as a person, let alone where do I fit into the world. And so um, that was always a challenge. When I growing up, my father did construction painting work. We did work all over the city. I actually moved to the Bronx because we used to paint the hallways of Montefiore, and there was a point in time when we were homeless. It was Montefiore and a senior vice president at that institution that offered us an apartment to move to the Bronx. That's how the Bronx became home. Years later, I went to college. I went to John Jay, and I knew that I was either going to graduate and go do construction work, or I needed to challenge myself for new experiences. That's how I did the internship. That's what exposed me to government politics. I built a network with some of the folks I had a chance to work with, and that opened the doors for me to get into government. But it was never a path that I thought was for me, nor that I was prepared for. I actually, when Ruben left the assembly and asked that I consider running, I said no 17 times. I did not think that I was ready for it. My wife, actually, at the time we were dating, but she was the one that said, "Give it a shot." Easy for her to say. She's Dominican; they love politics. But I wasn't really that into it. But I did care about policy, and I loved. There were issues that I cared about. I enjoyed my time there, so I gave it a shot. So I can't tell you that it was a grand plan. I just sort of made good decisions along the way. I kept my eyes and ears open for opportunities, and I had to be nudged, but I finally took a chance on myself in some of those, and they've worked out, and they've put me in a position to do some things that I can be proud of, that I know have had a positive impact on the community. And so I say all of that to say I could not replicate this if I had to start over on purpose. A lot of things I attribute to chance or opportunity. My faith teaches me that we all have a destiny and a call, and so maybe there's a little bit of that involved. But the truth is, if you educate yourself, if you keep your ears and eyes open, and you realize that your experiences are as big a part of your educational experience as anything you do academically in a classroom, if you don't shy away from who you are, I would always talk about my experience. I always talked about and drove a lot of my policy decisions based on my own personal experience. Education, I was passionate about it as an elected official, and I got involved in the charter school movement as an example, in large part because I went to school in Peru, and the math that I saw in elementary school in Peru, I didn't see in the US till high school. And I wrote my last paper in high school, my first paper in college about this. The difference was that in Peru, if you used a calculator, it was considered cheating. And in the US, my teachers would say, bring a calculator so you can do the work. And I was like, wait a second. How is it that I'm coming from a poorer country, a so-called third world country, and the educational system has this level of expectation, and here they're not even challenging me? And that started to make me pay more attention to some of those concepts and education and delivery of education and what it means for people like me and communities like mine. I didn't think I can go to college. If it wasn't for the TAP program and the SEEK program, I would not have been able to afford it. And so it's amazing how life has a way of putting you in a position, but we all come across, I think, those open doors of taking a step towards a challenge in life, a new direction, but most importantly, this concept that I mentioned of having an opportunity to lead and speak for. And I think that is something that we're seeing now in the mobilization across the country, that people are finding a comfort zone and saying, I'm going to speak up. I don't care if I have a title. I don't care if I have a legitimate, office or staff. I'm going to speak my mind and I'm going to talk about the things that need to be talked about. And that, I think that's a positive thing.
I want to stick with for a second the idea of the difference between when you came to Peru and what you encountered there. You and I have had a conversation about this, I think, before. Just briefly, I'd heard part of that conversation, and a few months ago, I listened to a podcast, and they had a podcast was with Maurice Ashley, who's a Jamaican grandmaster, and he, a Jamaican grandmaster for chess. He talked about something similar about his transition from school in Jamaica and coming to New York, and that what he encountered, the level of whether it's the coursework, our expectations at the school were lower than what he had been doing in Jamaica. My parents said the same thing when they came from the South. My mother's from Mississippi, and she came to school, and for her, North was Detroit, and said the same thing. She called it, and our family called it baby math, and she encountered this thing. Why are we doing math that I was doing, some years ago? You said that kind of thing helped shape sort of your passion and your drive for education. Say a little bit more about sort of what is it that you were trying to change beyond beyond sort of expectations, or say more about what you were trying to change. What did you want to?
Yeah. So look, so that experience, what I recognized in my own academic experience, was the differences in our cultural approach to the culture of education, right? Whether in Peru and Puerto Rico and what I experienced here in New York and a year that I did in Florida, it was drastically different in every one of these places. The feel as a student, the expectations, the pressure you felt or lack thereof, all of these things were drastically different. And that was interesting to me, why those differences and why this place was like that and that place was like this. I can attribute some of that, and this is a bit of a controversial, I guess, concept, but in my mind, some of that has to do with need. Countries where, families understand what poverty means and generational poverty, and the fact that the only option out of that extreme poverty is an education. In this country, there are other options. If you don't graduate, you may have other alternatives to supplement your needs in life. And those things don't exist in Peru, for example. And so there was a different sort of social pressure, family pressure and expectation that younger generation had to do better, had to do more, had to achieve something. I think there's something to that. But it's also the culture. It's also, any system, especially a large system like education, tends to be anywhere you go. The bigger the system, the more the staff, the broader the tentacles, the longer those tentacles, the harder it is to maintain that level of culture from what's happening at the base to, the furthest point of that system. And I think that's an important point, that culture has to be adjusted on a regular basis. The other thing is this. What drove me to really speak out, I thought about this issue from that experience, but what really drove me to speak out was what I encountered with my stepdaughter. When I met my wife grew up in High Bridge in the Bronx, a tough neighborhood, and went to one of those quote unquote systemically failing public schools. It was year after year. The vast majority of students did not graduate, did not read or write at grade level. And my wife was a typical Bronx story, young woman who had a child at a young age, had to interrupt their education in order to take care of her child. She was blessed with a mother who was hardworking and ran a small business and gave her an opportunity to help run that business. And that's how, she got by. But when I came into the picture, my stepdaughter was in elementary school, was struggling tremendously. My wife asked me to help her out. We realized her homework wasn't even being looked at by the teachers. She went on a regular basis to the school to demand a different teacher, a different classroom, more tutoring, and all of that was denied, was just not made available. It wasn't until the year I got elected to the assembly and one of these deans at the school recognized me as an elected official that all of a sudden, one day to the next, they offered her a tutor for English and math. They asked her which classroom she wanted and which of 2 after school programs she wanted to place her in. And I was insulted. I mean, I appreciated him trying, but why? Why did it take me getting elected? This is a parent who had been begging for services. So then the principal, trying to cover their tracks, said, go get an IEP. She's struggling, but it's not our fault. We did. And we went to get the IEP, and the IEP came back that she was severely learning disabled, that she would not catch up. At that point, they if I remember correctly, it was like 2.5 grade levels behind. And they said, in elementary school. And the teacher then said to me, not the teacher, the person at the program that gave my wife the results of the IEP said, you should really start thinking about vocational training in the near future. We're talking about an elementary school child. Now, keep this in mind. My mother-in-law is a Pentecostal minister. We weren't married yet. I lived in Soundview. They lived in Highbridge. I convinced her. I said, look, our relationship is serious and we're headed in the right direction. Consider moving in with me and your mom and your daughter. And let's, gather our resources and let's find another school option. We ended up putting my daughter in a Catholic school. We ended up placing her in a Catholic school program. We're not Catholic. My mother-in-law is Pentecostal. But we put her in a Catholic school program that had a bridge class that was for students that were falling behind. She caught up those grade levels. My stepdaughter graduated with decent grades. She's now in her junior year at Queens College. A child that was otherwise told she would never make it and would need vocational training. We had the wherewithal and the resources, sacrificing, but we made the resources available to take those options. How many families in my neighborhood don't have that? How many families wouldn't challenge? How many parents wouldn't even challenge the findings of a program that is telling you your child has a disability, or a teacher that just doesn't look at their homework? And this is a frustrating thing for me, because when we talk about some of these larger issues of racial equity and social justice, a lot of the conversation has trended towards law enforcement, rightfully so, and other issues. I wish that lens really started to look at education. I think the most important system in this country, yes, is our public educational system. But having a system is one thing. Ensuring that that system is working for all is something different. And one of the reasons I got really involved in this educational reform movement is this idea that education can be so many different things, and the needs of each student can be so varied, that we need to be open to adjustments. We need to be open to new strategies and new approaches, and rethinking, the delivery of that educational experience, and making sure that the culture is strong, and that the expectations are clear. And I really believe the charter school movement brings a lot of that to the table. I believe that there are other school choices, and even the private school system. I don't trivialize it as something for just the rich, because I also know that if you go through many of the Catholic schools, it's filled with students who are not Catholic and who are there on scholarships. They're not there because they can afford it necessarily. But parents will never put a bureaucracy or political strategy ahead of the needs of their child. And no parent should ever be told that whatever their child needs to take a back seat to some broader political question. That should not be the barrier. And so that's what really my stepdaughter's experience, and how she proved me wrong, because I started to believe it, Yamika. I believed that my stepdaughter wouldn't make it. I was convincing my wife at the time to just accept that she didn't have what some other kids had, and I was wrong. And I'm grateful that I was wrong, because it now sort of has spurred this call to action to say, I need to help other families and advocate for other families who have not had that fight yet, or who haven't been able to achieve that for their children.
Very good. All right, we have about 5 minutes left. That right there, I want to bottle that up and just sort of take that to everyone who will listen, of just the importance of being your own advocate, of not accepting what a system tells you. And I think I'm going to just add, that's particularly important for people of color and people who are low income, because I think we find ourselves, as you said, going back to the beginning of this conversation, there's an imposter syndrome that affects us. There's trauma. There are all these things where using our own power of agency, they're not necessarily forefront of what we're going to do, how we're going to encounter systems and people. And as you said, education is probably one of the most important things in our lives, where we should absolutely, positively do that. We should challenge, and we should fight. Thank you so much for that. Like I said, 5 minutes left. You're out of elected office, still in the Bronx, still passionate about the transformative power of education. What do you see as in the future for education? What do you hope to do, or what do you hope somebody else works on?
So I interesting enough, you in the story about my life history, I ended up now joining Montefiore as a senior vice president and working on healthcare management and healthcare delivery. And I'm senior vice president of community affairs. So my role is to continue to tie the healthcare industry, healthcare delivery, and this connection from health and wealth, and making sure that as a system we are an economic engine for our borough and our neighborhoods. And so it's interesting, having gone from painting their apartments to serving in the administration of that same institution that helped me come to the Bronx and make the Bronx home. So it's coming full circle. But yeah, this opportunity was important to me because it was also still in the community, and I get to deliver for the community. And I say that because this is something I really want to stress. You do not need, I don't care who's listening right now, I don't know if you're an administrator, a parent, an alumni, whoever you are and whatever you're doing in life, you have an opportunity to shape policy and politics. You can do that as powerfully from outside of government as you can from within government. And that's something that when I came to realize that I wasn't going to give up my role in advocacy just because I left the title of assembly member. And so I think it's important that we all not be shy about what our experiences are, not trivialize those little moments when you get to interact with the right people, or you know what, go out of your way a little bit to put yourself in that position, because elected officials and policymakers, they do listen, and it stays with them when they hear from constituents, from families, from voters who say, what are you doing about this? This matters to me. And I think it's incredibly important that everybody never lose that sense, no matter where you go in life. I'm grateful for this transition. For me, at this time in life, I get to spend time with my two girls who are charter school students. They've had an amazing experience with remote learning. Success Academy is their school, and they've had a great platform for kids to be full-time online with their teachers since the very beginning of this pandemic. And so my daughters haven't lost a lot of that educational interaction that's important. I am grateful for that. I hear other stories of students in other school systems where it's just been a roller coaster and issues. But I am excited about what the future holds. I think the country is going through an incredible process. This election, so much hinges on what's happening now politically. So I encourage everybody to vote. But most importantly, I think what we're learning as a society is that advocacy matters, and it can come from everyone. It doesn't have to be somebody who's in elected office or with a major title. Everyone and anyone can be an advocate, no matter your age or your experience level. But if we speak our mind and if we fight for the things that matter to our kids, to our communities, then and we can make a difference. And you're starting to see a change. It'll be a process, but I do think we're going to see a change. And I hope education is part of that conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope you're part of that conversation in terms of keeping up the fight where you are right now. I know we'll never lose an advocate for education for kids. Thank you so much for your time today, sir.
Thank you. You see, as you can see, I talk a lot, so I'll never stop talking.
All right, that's good. All right.